Thank you. I get the privilege to introduce Jean Welch Hill. As the executive director of the Washington State Catholic Conference, Jean Welch leads advocacy efforts and represents the bishops of the Archdiocese of Seattle, the Diocese of Spokane, and the Diocese of Yakima on public policy matters. Drawn over 25 years' experience in state federal advocacy, she also directs year round advocacies across Washington state. She comes to us directly from Salt Lake City County, where she was the director of the Office of Homelessness and Criminal Justice Reform and the county's Criminal Justice Advisory Council. Prior to that, for 11 years, she was the director of the Office of Life, Justice, and Peace for the Diocese of Salt Lake City, government liaison for the diocese, and part time communication director. She also worked with the Catholic Mobilization Network, seeking to end the death penalty in Utah. Jean was a member of the Shelter the Homeless Board, co chair of the Salt Lake Valley Coalition to End Homelessness, and member of the Utah Commission on Criminal and Juvenile Justice. In 2021, Utah Catholic Community Services named her Humanitarian of the Year for her work in advocating for the immigration, the poor, inmates, and other vulnerable populations. Prior to working on behalf of the Catholic Church, Jean was an associate professor at the University of Utah and served as an attorney for the Utah State Board of Education for 12 years. She earned her JD and Bachelor of Science from the University of Utah. Ms. Hill, in her role, doesn't just do this job, she has a passion for what she does. And as an advocate for all peace and justice issues, sanctity of life issues, please join me in welcoming Miss Jean Welch Hill.
Thank you very much. So it's going to be a little louder in the room because folks online are having a hard time hearing. So I'm going to be a little, well, I'm normally loud, but I'm going to be loud. So if you have issues, raise your hand. You can move to the back a little bit, but I want to make sure our folks online are able to hear us. So thank you. Obviously, I've spent most of my time in Utah. So this is a little new, but I will tell you, Utah is a very red state. This is a very blue state. In both states, the problem is the same. When one party rules, you don't have conversation, dialogue, debate, compromise. And that's an issue. Here in this room, thankfully, we're not coming as red or blue or purple or green or any other colors. We are coming as Catholics. So, our ground rules for this evening, we are not here. We started with prayer because we are here as Catholic voters, not as political party voters. And we know where two or three are gathered in my name, I am there. So two or three of us are here. Hopefully, Jesus is with us, God is with us. And so we won't call each other names because we wouldn't want to do that in front of our God. So we're here to talk about what it means to be a Catholic voter, which is a very different place to come at voting from, but also what it means to be a Catholic in the public square. Because after the election is over, our work isn't done. We are, as Catholics, morally obligated to participate in our communities, and that includes in our political community. So, as Emmeline and others, I believe, said, the WSEC is the public policy voice of the bishops of the state of Washington. We are not the only state that has a conference. Every state that has more than one diocese has a Catholic conference to do advocacy. In the Diocese of Salt Lake City, we had one bishop, so the conference was me and the bishop. It was a lot easier, but but it is good to be in a place that actually has a broader array of Catholics, a broader spectrum of Catholics to get involved in advocacy. And so I'm excited to be here to talk to you tonight. As mentioned too, please do hold your questions till the end. We will have plenty of time for question and answer, but we want to make sure that we're grounded in our faith first, and then we can start talking about issues a little bit more in depth. That's another one of our ground rules here. We are here to talk about how we approach politics as Catholics, not to try and convince each other how to vote or what issues should be most important to us. Because that's not how Catholic teaching works. We have to form our own consciences about our votes. So we will talk about Catholic approaches to issues, but we're not here to debate those issues or again to try and convince one another. We can agree on policy or disagree on policy. We may each vote very differently. That doesn't make any of us less Catholic. What we bring to this is the recognition that in each one of us is Christ, that we all, whether we're Catholic or not, share human dignity. We all have equal value and dignity. And so we're not going to say any other person is evil. We're not going to say any other person is going to hell because of the way they voted. We're here to learn more about our faith so that we can make those decisions as faithful Catholics, not as partisan individuals. And it also helps us to just kind of take all that political noise and put it aside for at least a few minutes so that we can really ground ourselves in our faith and our core values before we go into the voting booth. So, who we are in the public square, here's the big difference between us as Catholic voters versus us as a Republican voter or a Democratic voter or a Green Party or a Libertarian or whatever it might be. We're not voting because it's what's in it for me. As Catholics, we participate in politics because politics structures all of the systems that impact our daily lives. And we want to make sure the common good is reflected in how those structures are set up and how they're operating. So, Catholic voters approach all of our political activity from the perspective, first and foremost, of how does this impact those who are most vulnerable, those who are living in poverty, those who need those structures to be most effective for them, and how does our political structure reflect that every human being has equal value and dignity. So we come to this from a very different perspective. Obviously, we're not looking at, well, what's it going to do for my pocketbook? We're looking at what's it going to do for my neighbors, my community, for all of those around, for all those people sleeping on the streets in Seattle tonight. What's going to happen with my vote or what I am doing right now? And again, because we are all made in the image and likeness of God, yes, we as Catholic protects the sanctity of life. But our position on the sanctity of life gets really dumbed down in some ways in the public square. We aren't about life at just one end of the spectrum. What makes it hard to be a Catholic voter is that we're about all of the issues because we care desperately and deeply about what happens to the unborn. We also care about what happens to the elderly and the folks who are in prison for life and all the people in between, like all those immigrants that are trying to find a new life and all of those folks, again, sleeping on the streets and all of those folks who are just struggling to get by. Conception to natural death and what happens in the two part is pretty important as well. So that's what makes it difficult to be a Catholic voter because we have to consider all of the issues and we can each decide that, some issues matter more to me than others do. But we don't go into that voting booth saying, well, I just need to look at this one thing and then I'm done, because we really do need to be reflective of the common good. How we participate in the political arena matters. As Catholics, we don't have the luxury of voting without understanding our faith and researching candidates. So you've heard the story, the old adage of, not adage, but the old story anecdote of, well, that's the person I can drink a beer with. Well, as Catholic voters, hopefully that's not how we're deciding how we're voting. Hopefully we are taking a little bit more time to research the candidates, research their positions. We have the responsibility to form our consciences and exercise the virtue of prudence. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that, what that means in just a moment here. First step, though, is to register to vote. Hopefully you're all registered because you can't vote if you don't register. So that is step one. That's the easy part of political participation. Just get registered. The state of Washington has voting materials in multiple languages. I think it was 19 languages available. So if you know people who are saying, well, I can't read that ballot, it makes me nervous, chances are there's a ballot in their language and voting materials in their language. What we bring to the conversation as Catholic voters. First and foremost is our very consistent moral framework, our consistent ethic of life. That's not something that every voter brings. Our the depth and breadth of our teaching on the dignity and sanctity of life is something that we as Catholics really do need to lift up and bring out into the public square. And it's one of the reasons, I would never say this issue isn't important or that issue isn't important. But I think if we're not sharing that full breadth of our teaching, people don't really understand that consistent ethic of life. Every human life matters equally. Bottom line, every life matters. And so we want to make sure that we're reflecting that. And it's not going to be easy. I'm not saying that this is easy stuff. Oh, sorry, I just did something I shouldn't have done. But it is what we're called to do. We also bring centuries of experience serving the most vulnerable. Catholic Community Services here is the second largest provider of homeless services in the state next to the state. Catholic charities across the state provide multiple services, and they do that with volunteers from Catholic parishes. We know how to serve people on the ground. And as you've seen, Pope Francis isn't the first to say this. The popes across decades have said this. Encounter with one another is how we learn. And we as Catholics have a lot of experience with encounter because we're at the border serving people. You want to find out what's happening in the border? Call Sister Norma. She is asking people to come down and help. You can meet people at the border and see what's really happening and who those people really are. We bring that to the table. And again, that shared dignity of every person is a critical piece of what we offer. So, voting Catholic. Remember that in Catholic teaching, every human being deserves to live and every human being deserves to live a life of dignity. And in this country, what that means to have a life of dignity means you have access to adequate food, healthy food. You have access to clean water. You have access to housing, safe and stable housing. You have an education. You have meaningful employment, and you have health care. Those are the basics of a life of dignity in this country. And the Catechism says, and the book nobody knows exists, but it's just as important as the Catechism, this compendium of the social doctrine of the Catholic Church lays out those things. What makes a life of dignity in each country depends on the country. But in this country where we have so much wealth and so many assets, those are the pieces that every person deserves. Protecting sanctity of life means that we are striving to protect against abortion, assisted suicide, racism, poverty, addiction, the death penalty. Thankfully, that's not an issue up here, and any other threats to human life. We have this growing nuclear threat that is getting a little bit out of control. We have national or international actors who may not be rational actors in the nuclear debate. That piece of what's happening out there in the world is going to be very critically important in this presidential debate, even though you probably won't hear about it in any of the debates coming up, if there are any more debates coming up. The nuclear question isn't one on top of mind, but it is a question that we need to consider. And we as Catholics consider the character of the individual. Character does matter. We aren't voting issues on the ballot. When you go to look at your ballot, until you get to the initiatives, there isn't an issue in any of those names. They're people. We're voting for people. And with the question we need to ask is, in this state particularly, which of those people are going to hear the Catholic voice? They may not agree with us, but are they willing to hear the Catholic voice? And that's a question to ask on the state level particularly. So we have to pick the issues that matter to us, certainly, or we don't have to, but we can pick the issues that matter to us, certainly. The USCCB has said abortion is the preeminent issue. That's not an infallible judgment. That's not like the Pope saying Mary is a virgin, but that is something that we as Catholics give our attention to and recognize that those bishops are leaders of our faith and they have some knowledge of these issues. But again, not an infallible, oh my gosh, I got to keep doing that, sorry. Not an infallible statement. And something that we can look at for ourselves and say, is this my issue? Hopefully, you're not limiting yourself to one issue because again, that dignity of life is larger than one issue. Forming our consciences, what does that mean? That means that we are using our teaching, which guides us. It provides principles for us to consider as we're engaging in the public square. It gives us criteria for judgment. So, to form our consciences, we need to be grounded in prayer, grounded in our teaching, and listening to what God's trying to tell us. This is a lifelong task. This isn't something we do once and we're done. This is something we do on a regular basis. This is something when you're listening to the homilies on Sunday. I hear people a lot will say, "Well, the priest never talks about Catholic social teaching." Really? Every homily is Catholic social teaching to some extent because what our teaching is biblical. Catholic social teaching isn't something that was made up later. It's scripture based. So listen carefully to those homilies. They may have pieces in there that you haven't caught on to, but that are really quite helpful. Uh, and prudence. So prudence gives us some steps we can take to make our voting decisions, to make our political decisions, to make our advocacy decisions. How many of you have heard see, act, judge? A few of you. Okay. See, act, judge is kind of the Catholic approach to prudence. You see a situation. What's happening in that situation? What are the circumstances around that situation? Why is this happening? You judge that situation. What do I want to see happening here? What is the character of the nation that I want to see? What is the character of the state that I want to see? And then you act. What can I do to get me to that future I want to see? So a non-political example, I give sister $5. Yay. That act in itself, you see that act. You see me walk over to her and give her $5. Is that a good, bad, or illicit act? You don't know. Maybe I gave it to Sister Judy and said, hey, vote my way. So it's not such a good act. A bribe. Maybe I just gave it and said, you know what? You just take this and do something good with it. Great act. Totally unselfish act, right? We have to judge the act not just by saying, I see what's happening here, so now I know what's happening. We need to ask deeper questions. Why is it happening? What are those circumstances? Maybe I am giving Judy that $5 because I know she's going to take it and help somebody who is really going to need that money, right? That makes both of us good actors. Maybe I'm giving it to her because she, I don't know, paid my parking ticket and I owe her money. What we need to just not judge an act on the surface. We need to dig deeper. And then we know the church talks about acts that are illicit on their face, right? Morally illicit acts. Abortion is a morally illicit act. So then we go a little deeper into the analysis and ask, okay, one of the things that we can do that's really kind of critical on abortion and immigration in particular is again that question of why. Why is somebody seeking an abortion? Why is somebody seeking to cross the border? Because those questions get us deeper into policy. Most women seek abortion because they don't know how they're going to afford their child. Most women who seek abortions already have a child. There is no choice in I can't afford to raise my child. And right now in this country particularly, we are really focused on women who choose abortion. We do not focus on the women who want to keep their child. There's a lot we can do to help women who are seeking an abortion because they think that that's their only choice. And those are policies we want to promote. Immigration, putting a wall up on the border, it's already there, I hate to tell you. And where it isn't is an area where the federal government long ago said people are going to die crossing there because it's desert. So we don't need to put up a fence. So we need to ask that question, why would somebody leave everything they know, including their language, to cross a border into a country that is incredibly hostile to them at the moment? And has been for years, or to a country that there is no path to citizenship for so many people. When we start asking those questions, why, then we as Catholics are better able to see, act, and judge and be better voices on policy. You don't need to be an expert on policy to contact your legislator. But I do urge you to think more deeply about issues and ask those questions of why. So, how does Catholic social doctrine guide us in the public square? You may have heard the 7 themes of Catholic social teaching, the 10 themes of Catholic social teaching. In the USCCB's Forming Conscience for Catholic for Forming Consciences for Faithful Citizenship, you'll see they have those 7 combined into 4. And those 4 combine all of the teaching. So dignity of the human person, subsidiarity, which I'll explain in a minute, the common good, and solidarity. Dignity of the human person we know well. This is a foundational principle. Every person is made in the image of likeness of God, so every person has equal dignity and value. That means that direct attacks on innocent persons are never morally acceptable. And we are one of the few faiths arguing against the throwaway culture. Assisted suicide is throwaway culture. You're elderly. You can't walk as well. You need people to help you. You should just go away. That is ultimate throwaway culture. You're living on the street. You're not a productive member of society. You should go away. That is throwaway culture. For a baby right now, I'm going to get that abortion. That's throwaway culture. So we know we've got to battle against that culture. We know abortion and euthanasia in this 2025 session are probably going to be big issues. We're probably going to be doing a lot of advocacy on these issues, along with the clergy penitent privilege, which I'll talk more about as well. So we need to be able to talk about it. We really need to be able to talk about our view of life and the reality that it's amazing what women can do. We don't talk about that. Pregnancy and childbirth, there's only half the population that can do that. It's an amazing, amazing ability that we have to hold someone who, by the grace of God, has been given to us. And for 9 months, we are utterly and completely responsible for that little person. That's an incredible, incredible thing. And we need to really bring that to the forefront that, this little cluster of cells you talk about can only ever be one thing. And that is a human person. So why don't we lift up that amazing ability of women and start talking about, again, women who want their children and how we help women who want their children. And we will see, I'm sure, attempts to expand assisted suicide in this state. And so again, the bills aren't out yet, but we do expect that there will be quite a few of those. Dignity of the human person also addresses homelessness. It is not dignified to live on a street. It is not dignified to be in housing, permanent supportive housing, where you are trying to get the help you need and the services you need. But because of our laws in this state on eviction, the guy who is causing all of the problems in permanent supportive housing can't ever be evicted. So you who are trying to be sober and get over addiction have to live next to the drug dealer. We need to be able to address a dignified living situation for even somebody living in poverty. Just because someone's poor doesn't mean that they should be in less safe or stable housing than anyone else. So let's get the person who is a former addict and trying to stop being an addict and the person who is actively addicted, and let's put them in different housing and address their issues differently. Because that's how housing first works. We get you housed, yes, because nobody living on the street is ever going to overcome a mental illness or an addiction. But we can't put you all in the same building and expect good outcomes. We need to be treating people as individuals. Unjust discrimination, racism, sexism, ableism, those are affronts to the dignity of life. If I don't speak English well and I need services and somebody I'm going to for those services won't talk to me because they don't like the fact I don't speak English well, that's hurting the dignity of that person. That's hurting the dignity of both people. But so we need to combat unjust discrimination as well. All right, subsidiarity. Subsidiarity basically means we want people to be able to do for themselves. So we don't want big government doing everything. But we know that, the old saying, if you give a man a fish, you give him a meal for a day. If you teach him to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. Well, you don't if he doesn't have access to a pond. So subsidiarity is about giving access to the pond. We got to make sure people have the resources they need so that they can do for themselves. So, for example, in Washington, we have the clean building standards, right? So all buildings, everyone who owns a building it needs to be looking at their usage of utilities. Are they throwing all kinds of emissions into the air and figuring out how to clean up their buildings. It's a great idea, except you have a whole bunch of nonprofits that own buildings. And this is an expensive idea. Those nonprofits don't have the resources to comply with your law. So we need to make sure they have resources to do so that they can also be part of the common good of cleaning up our environment. Marriage and family life. We have the right to teach our faith in our schools because we have families who want their kids in Catholic schools. So that shouldn't be infringed upon by the state. We have a desperate need for affordable childcare because families have the right to have, well, maybe they don't even want the right, but they may have two jobs because that's how you survive. It's very hard for folks to survive on one income. They have the right to have their kids in high quality childcare or have early learning options. Again, assisted suicide, addressing the root causes of child abuse and neglect. As you may know if you paid attention to the state legislature, they're very focused on clergy reporting if somebody in confession admits to abuse. Mandatory reporting laws have not been shown to be successful at preventing child abuse. There was a story today, I think it was it was in the Tacoma News Tribune. Teacher, 4 kids have come forward, been abused. They're suing, one set of parents is suing the school district because they said, you knew. You knew this was happening and you did nothing. Because teachers are mandatory reporters, but you don't want to report your colleagues, especially somebody who you think is a good person. And most child predators will choose kids who are not going to be believed. So mandatory reporting makes us feel better, but it's not solving the issue. Again, we need to ask, why is this happening? Where you have kids, that's where pedophiles want to work or volunteer. That's a bigger issue we have to address. And funding for intensive wraparound services. This is a program that Catholic Community Services piloted and perfected. This is mental health care for kids. And we know that our kids right now are suffering from mental health issues even more than we as adults are. So we really need to address that in this coming legislative session as well. Religious freedom. Here is where the seal of confession really comes in. And I do have some talking points that I will share with you. If you want to talk to your legislators about the clergy penitent privilege, we don't say child abuse is okay. Obviously not. Child abuse is never, never okay. But when you go into the confessional as the state, involving child abuse, that's actually just a massive First Amendment violation. Priests cannot tell what has been said in confession. If they do, canon law says it's automatic excommunication. They have no ability to tell you what happened in confession. A priest can be in confession. And here's the other thing that the legislators aren't realizing. If you have a little 8-year-old person going into confession, because we know child sex abuse victims usually believe that they did something wrong and that's why it's happening to them. Thank you. So if you have a little person going to confession and they think that, oh my gosh, the priest is going to tell the police on me, you've deprived that little person of the opportunity to go in there and be told you didn't do anything wrong and we need to get out of here and make sure that you get some help so that this stops happening. There are consequences to these easy fixes of mandatory reporting. So you have some talking points. If you know your legislator, if you don't know your legislator, here's a chance to get to know them because they work for you, believe it or not. And you can just email them and you can call them and you can send them Twitter messages or Facebook messages to let them know that you're a Catholic voter and you care about these issues. And you do not want your faith, you do not want the state in your confessional because that's a requirement of our faith that we go there. It is a purely religious act and the state doesn't belong in there. School choice. We know the state is not real friendly to school choice options. But we are going to keep reminding them that just in our Catholic schools alone, we have 27,000 or so kids that the public schools don't have to educate. And we do a really good job at education. Our Catholic schools are recognized for doing a good job at education. So if you're going to last session there was a bill that was going to give parents money for tutors or uh, lessons or materials that they might need. If a kid's not doing well in school, then the parent could get funds to help them find something that would help the kid. What if that thing that would help the kid is a Catholic school? What if they would find their success in that environment? Shouldn't they be able to use those funds that way? So that's a battle that we will keep fighting in the state as well. The common good, promoting justice, countering violence. The USCCB, the Vatican, and us are very strong on gun violence prevention. That is not take your guns away, but that is how do we prevent gun violence more successfully, because this country has an issue with gun violence. Questions about the ICE detention center in Tacoma in particular. How are we treating those migrants in those detention centers? How are we treating prisoners in any of our facilities? But one of the big challenges that the Catholic Church has raised is to any private prisons or private detention centers. When you commodify a human being in that manner, that's a grave moral issue. Private prisons, private detention centers make money by keeping beds filled. They don't make money by rehabilitating anyone. We call it the Department of Corrections because the idea is that we're correcting behavior, not that we are warehousing individuals so somebody else can make money. So those are issues for the common good. Healthcare, affordable access to healthcare. So this is one of the reasons that we are saying vote no on Initiative 2124, which is the initiative that would allow it to be optional to pay into the long-term care program. What that program does is provide an option for working individuals who do not make enough to afford long-term care. You only get $36,500 lifetime amount, but long-term care is horribly expensive. $36,500 is the difference for some folks between, yes, I've got a month of a home nurse coming once a week, versus I'm going to have to go and get my prescription for the assisted suicide pill because I can't afford my health care anymore. It's a life issue. It's a preferential option for the poor issue. Making it optional means the money goes away, and those working poor folks who don't qualify for Medicaid will not have a long-term care option. So we are opposing that, and I have I'll put these on the table over there too. We've got one-pagers on both of the initiatives as well that you can look at if you're interested. And care for our common home. Of course, we are about care of creation. If you haven't read Laudato Si, shame on you. You need to read Laudato Si. Pope Francis brings our teaching beautifully together in that pastoral letter, and we definitely understand that, if you care about life, without the planet, no life is sustainable. So it is a life issue. It's a huge life issue. We also need to recognize that a lot of people are migrating from their home countries because their countries are being destroyed by climate change, and we're one of the biggest culprits in that. So, I managed to go with Catholic Relief Services to Malawi in Africa, and we went to see what climate change is doing and then how CRS is helping to overcome it. But there's a big river in Malawi called the Shire River, and it has a torrential rain season that the people always knew when it was coming and knew how far it would go. Well, with climate change, that season is shorter, but more severe. And so whole villages were being wiped out because of the change in how the monsoon season was happening in the area. So CRS went in there and discovered that, the people actually decades before knew how to build their homes to protect them from floodwaters, and they had stopped doing that over the years. So CRS works beautifully by always working with people on the ground. They hire people in the country. Their goal is when they leave, the knowledge isn't lost, the materials aren't lost. You don't need CRS anymore, and that's when they leave. So they reminded people how to build their homes to withstand floodwaters. That's great. That's the charity side of what we're doing. We need to work on the justice side of how do we address massive climate change that is impacting the poorest countries the most. And those are issues that we can consider in our political engagement. We won't turn. Come on. Got this far. It's got to work. There we go. And promoting peace. Peace is a big issue right now, obviously. We have a lot going on in the world. We need to be promoters of peace. We need to be promoters of against the use of torture. We need to be engaged in the nuclear discussion. The idea of returning to nuclear testing, the idea of deterrence against entities like North Korea or Iran who aren't going to be deterred, we need better ideas on how we're going to address nuclear weapons. And preferential option for the poor, economic justice. Who's going to be most useful creating jobs? Who's going to be most useful making sure that we have just wages that people can live on in lives of dignity? In this state, we have a housing crisis. In many states in the West, we have housing crisis. Who's in the state legislature, who in the governor's office, who in the AG's office is going to help us address that housing crisis? We have incredibly regressive tax policies in this state. The poor pay more to live in Washington state. How do we address that situation to make it more just and recognize that we want all policy? And this coming legislative session, they're talking, legislators are talking, the governor is talking. It's an austerity year, especially if the initiatives pass. We're going to lose hundreds of millions of dollars. So no new programs in the budget, and we're going to have to cut. Here's what Catholic voters can say in that situation. Whether you are flush, whether you are in austerity, preferential option for the poor. Your budget needs to reflect our priorities, and our priority is those who are most vulnerable, those who are living in poverty, are not harmed with that budget. Budgets are moral documents. Show us what your priorities are, and your priorities need to be people in poverty. Solidarity migration. Immigration is a huge issue across the nation. The Catholic Church's teaching on immigration is very clear, very strong, and very consistent. You can't miss it. If you haven't read Strangers No Longer from the USCCB, it sets it all out for you, but you don't even need to go that far. You just need to go the Old Testament. You shall not wrong a stranger or oppress him, for you yourselves were strangers in the land of Egypt. That's Exodus. When a stranger resides with you in your land, you shall not oppress him. The stranger who resides with you shall be to you as the citizen among you, and you shall love him as yourself. For you were strangers in the land of Egypt. That's Leviticus. No matter who you have chosen, who you want to vote for, who you think you're going to vote for, we as Catholics need to say no human being is vermin. That's not acceptable, regardless of your chosen candidate. Language that dehumanizes is not acceptable from any political leader. And we as Catholics can be strong proponents for saying, you know what, I like your policies on this. Be talking about human beings as anything less than human beings. Human trafficking, that's always a big issue. It's a really big issue in Seattle. Seattle is a hub for human trafficking. And that will be, I think we'll probably see legislation on that as well coming up. And global solidarity. We are a global church. We believe everyone is our brother and sister. We care about those kids over there as much as we care about the kids here. We care about those people over there as much as we care about the people here. We care about global solidarity. We understand, especially, things like climate change. What we do here isn't limited to here. It doesn't stay here. It's not Las Vegas. It goes all over. So we need to be looking at what are the policies that are going to be put in place that reflect global solidarity. We need to protect asylum seekers. It's hard. There's a lot of asylum seekers. There's a lot of war happening. We need to be doing something about asylum seekers. We need to address the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The Catholic Church is pretty clear that the two-state solution is the preferred solution for the Israeli-Palestine conflict. That's easier said than done, no question. But we can be voices for ensuring that, again, both groups of people, their lives are protected and defended. So, to be Catholic in the public square, here's your next steps. Know the spectrum of Catholic social teaching. You don't have to be an expert on it, but know your teaching as you're looking at issues and voting. Understand the weight of those issues. Study the candidates as well as their party platforms. Know the office they're going to hold. Your city council member can't do much about nuclear war. So maybe that's not the most important issue for the city council person. Our issues can change based on what the person's running for. Consult scripture, pray, and test your decision, and then act on it. So Bishop Flores, who's the Bishop of Brownsville, Texas, says, imagine Jesus is sitting next to you as you're filling out the ballot. If you're hiding your ballot from him, probably not the vote you want to make. So there's your test to make sure. Can learn more through us, wawcatholics.org. We have these materials that we've handed out are all on our website during the legislative session. If you haven't joined our network, please do. You can go to wawcatholics.org and join the network because we send weekly bulletins during the legislative session on things that are coming up and give you, quick click here to take action so that you can be a Catholic advocate during the session. We do trainings on these kinds of issues. We do year-round advocacy activities, and we are more than happy to help you if you wanted to have candidates come and speak to your parish and you want to know how to do that or what to do or what the guidelines are for that, because you can't just say, I'm just going to invite the candidates from one party. You got to invite both, all, however many there are. You need to have a fair forum so that your fellow Catholics can learn more about the people who are running for office. And contact your legislators. I don't know how many of you do it regularly. They may never respond to you, but you never give up trying. And you're always polite and you don't write an 18-page diatribe. Because if you got an email that said, you jerk, and here's my reasons why you're a jerk, scroll down for 20 pages, you're not going to read it. So we're always polite because legislators who we disagree with or agree with have human dignity. They're human beings as well. So we want to be polite. We want to treat others as we would want to be treated. I am open for questions.
Go. We did pass out some cards, and we thought it'd be best to just, if you want to take a minute or two to jot down some questions, you might have been doing that during this wonderful presentation. But let's just take a minute to just jot down what we.
Oh,
There's a
Tracy, do you have one? Oh.
No? Okay. So let's just take a moment, jot down a question, and if you do, raise your hand, and Sister Judy and Emmeline will be coming by to pick them up.
Oh, well, I have one more thing. Sorry. I forgot on the common good. We are also taking a no position on Initiative 2117, which is the repeal and prohibition of the Climate Commitment Act. There are issues with the Climate Commitment Act, but to say it's going away, not only is it going away, but you can never have another one like it is not sound policy. Sorry, go ahead.
Any questions? Somebody's writing something. We have one here, which
Yeah, please go ahead.
goes right to what you just were talking about. Initiative 2117 would repeal the Climate Commitment Act. And through Laudato Si, Pope Francis urges us to listen and respond to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. One critique of the Climate Commitment Act is that it imposes a financial burden on low income persons. What do the Washington bishops say about caring for the earth, but not at the expense of the poor?
And what they have said is we need to make changes to the law. The Climate Commitment Act needs change. There's no question about it. One thing, though, that it does do too is it does fund a lot of programs to help lower income individuals, like the free transit for all people under 18, for all youth under 18. That's a good thing. Transportation for someone in poverty is a huge, huge issue. So it has good things for people in poverty, but yes, it absolutely needs some changes in the law. And we're not saying that it's perfect. There's no question it's not perfect. But carbon taxes are one option. Climate change is one of those issues of subsidiarity. You and I recycling here tonight is a good thing. It ain't going to solve climate change. It has to be on bigger levels. And if the state of Washington sets that kind of example that we can do something statewide to try and reduce emissions, and that can get tweaked here, yes, we're the guinea pigs, but if that can get tweaked to the point that it can spread, and maybe the nation does some things, and maybe other nations do some things, right? This is a problem that is going to need international cooperation, but that doesn't mean that every state can just continue to do what they have been doing. So it needs to be tweaked. Again, no question there. But the problem is the initiative doesn't just say repeal it, it says prohibit any similar legislation. And that's just, it's gone too far. That is overkill. That's not how public policy works. We can't be prohibiting potential solutions for major problems, but we can be trying to make those solutions work better for all individuals for the common good.
No questions yet in the chat.
This is just one that I was noting as you were speaking. It you said something. You said that it's probably more important that we ask ourselves in state elections, will this person listen to the voice of Catholics? Why would you say that the state elections would be
national.
more important than national elections?
Just because it's simpler to talk to your state legislators. I mean, on a national level, they need to be listening to Catholic voices as well. But for us in the state of Washington, who we're going to have the most chance of talking with is state legislators. And even if you can talk to your congressional delegation, they're 12 people out of 435. So it's not that you don't pay attention on the national level, but you're going to have a better, the governor's office. Is the governor willing to sit down with Catholics and talk about the expansion of assisted suicide? Which candidate would do that with us? Which candidate in the governor's office would talk to us about why do we call Catholic schools, private schools, unaccountable? Have you heard of national accreditation? We're accountable and doing a good job. Will you talk to us about that? They may not agree with us. This isn't about what they're saying in their TV commercials. This is about character, honesty, integrity. Which candidates will open their door to hear from their constituents? And Catholics are constituents. Again, we are not a voting bloc, right? We will all vote probably somewhat differently on one of the races. But we are constituents, and we are constituents of faith. And in a state that doesn't seem to like faith very much, it's really important for us to be constituents of faith and to challenge that mentality and say, I am a person of faith. And you want to come in my confessional? Let's talk about that, because you obviously don't understand Catholic teaching or the Catholic faith. And that I have to explain it to you should tell you right there that you're in a First Amendment problem, but that's just me.
We have a couple of other questions. Yeah. How does the Washington State Catholic Conference help formulate amendments to laws that need revision, whether it's on climate, immigration, or housing?
The conference we have two contract lobbyists. One is a Republican, one's a Democrat. And we work with them to get into legislators. So for instance, I will meet with Senator Noel Frame on the clergy penitent privilege bill in the next few weeks. And we'll try and work through amendments on that bill. We work through them just like any other lobby group, any other lobbyist. We meet with legislators and try and convince them that here's some changes we need to see. So on Climate Commitment Act, we can meet with those who've been real strong supporters of the act and say, look, you know what, this is great. We support what you're doing, but here's what we see on the ground working with Catholic charities. Here's the impact we're seeing on people in poverty. And you need to address that, because it's great that you fund these programs to help people in poverty. But meanwhile, we have a lot of people who their transportation is a car. And if they can't get to work, they can't stay employed. So we need to address how we're going to help them continue to be able to get to work without paying $10 a gallon in gas. I don't know. So we will just sit with legislators and talk to them about making those amendments. And then we'll put in our bulletin, hey, this bill is coming up for conversation in a committee hearing. Catholics, click on your pro or con on the bill with its amendments. Or, hey, Catholics, contact your legislators and here's a form you can adapt. Never just send the form letter. Whatever groups you're working with, never just send the form letter. You want to personalize it because they're not going to read every form letter, but they will read a personal letter, especially if the subject line of your email says constituent concerned about and whatever it is. If they know you're a constituent, they're more likely to open it. And if they see it starts with something that doesn't look familiar to them, they haven't had 15 forms that all started the same way, you're more likely to have them read it. And I had a friend in Salt Lake that, I preached the same thing there. And he started calling his legislator weekly to the point that they finally started to say, hey, Paul, how you doing? Because he wasn't mean. He wasn't obnoxious. He didn't call at 6 a.m. He just made sure that they got to know his name. And that's how it worked.
Final question. The USCCB says that abortion is the preeminent issue. Do the Washington state bishops agree with that?
We haven't set a preeminent issue in Washington state. Our issues are going to be abortion, assisted suicide, clergy penitent privilege, the budget, immigration, the environment. I mean, and we are able to handle more than one issue at a time. I mean, that's, and I don't know how the bishops are going to vote. I would never ask the bishops how they're going to vote. But in terms of public policy, our conference is not focused on single issues. We are focused on as much of the full spectrum as we can be, and choosing priority issues within that spectrum. Okay, if that's about, I do have a prayer, and I'm sorry, this is just my favorite prayer of all time, so I'm going to share it with you because we do need to end in prayer. So you will join me in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. And for the people online, I will say it. May God bless us with discomfort at easy answers, half truths, and superficial relationships, so that we may live deep within our hearts. May God bless us with anger at injustice, oppression, and exploitation of people, so that we may work for justice, freedom, and peace. May God bless us with tears to shed for those who suffer from pain, rejection, hunger, and war, so that we may reach out our hands to comfort them and turn their pain into joy. And may God bless us with enough foolishness to believe that we can make a difference in this world, so that we can do what others claim cannot be done, to bring justice and kindness to all of our children and the poor. Amen.